conference, they rarely grab headlines, but they play a critical role behind the scenes in terms of shaping decisions that world leaders will take at the COPs. These sessions are highly technical, they're in person only, and they receive far less media attention than the COP themselves. And that makes it really hard to follow what happens in Bonn and also to understand why it matters. So what we want to do today is take you behind those closed doors to really unpack some of the key moments of SB62, especially for climate adaptation. And we'll also explore some of the tensions and some of the key takeaways of the meetings. And really, ultimately, what we want to know is what does that mean for COP30 and the lead up to COP30. So let me change my slide. So this is the agenda for today. We'll do a little bit of scene setting, or I'll do a little bit of scene setting, explaining what these SB meetings are. And we will then turn to our three speakers who will explain what happened in Bonn, especially around adaptation. And we will then look ahead at COP30, get their insights on what some of the priorities need to be ahead of, but also at COP30. And we'll hopefully have time for a Q&A. So please do share your questions in the chat. I'm sure most of you are by now very familiar with webinars, so do drop them in the chat and we'll come back to them towards the end. As you can see, the session is being recorded. We can share the recording after the event. So here are our three speakers, which I'm really delighted to welcome to our session today. All of them were in Bonn, not only present, but also actively participated in Bonn. So it's a pleasure to have them. So we have María del Pilar Bueno Rubial, who's senior researcher at the National Council of Scientific and Technical Research. We have Katy Harris, who is senior policy fellow at SEI, Stockholm Environment Institute, and Lina Yassin, who is researcher on climate diplomacy at IIED. And maybe just a quick note to say that we have those three speakers and we're really privileged to have them today. But the event isn't aiming to be representative of all perspectives from at SB62. Think of it as one set of keys to understand the whole picture. But bear in mind, there were a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different views and positions in Bonn. So let me rewind a little bit and do a little bit of scene setting by explaining what the SBs and these SB meetings are. So the subsidiary bodies, or also commonly known as SBs, are two technical arms of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. On the one hand, we have the subsidiary body for scientific and technical advice, so that's the scientific and technical arm. And we have the subsidiary body for implementation, which deals with practical implementations. Both bodies are made up of representatives from all UNFCCC parties, so they're country parties, and each country that is a party to the UNFCCC can send delegates, negotiators to participate in those meetings. In those bodies. So they meet every year in June in Bonn to prepare for the political negotiations and decisions that take place at the annual COP, which is the well-known event that will take place this year in Brazil. So we see a mix of actors at those SB events, at those SB meetings. We have country parties, as I mentioned, but we also have UNFCCC constituted bodies and the Secretariat itself. We have other UN organizations. And importantly, we also have observers. So that includes the media, civil society, business, indigenous groups, youth, and academia. So why do these SB meetings matter? Well, as I mentioned at the very start of the session, SB don't receive as much attention as the COP, but they really play a critical role in terms of laying the groundwork for those COPs. That is advancing the technical negotiations, developing draft text, and in theory, resolving issues ahead of COPs, although that's not necessarily always the case, as new issues may emerge as well. SB62 was particularly significant for various reasons, some of them including that the global goal on adaptation framework was agreed at COP28, and this was the first major test of how that agreement would be taken forward, and we'll discuss that into more details. But we also know that this SB session was held in a very challenging global context, one that makes climate diplomacy more difficult, but also more essential. And this was highlighted by the COP30 presidency as well. And it was seen as a crucial opportunity to rebuild trust and enhance collaboration among country parties following the bruising COP29 negotiations. Whether that was successful, our presenters will let us know. And then I wanted to highlight as well, because this session focuses on adaptation, we know that adaptation has been branded as a key priority for COP30, for the COP30 presidency. The COP30 president, André Araña Correa do Lago, called adaptation the visible face of the global response. He's made very clear that adaptation will be a key pillar of the negotiations. And the COP30 CEO, Anatoni, confirmed that Belém must be a turning point for adaptation. And that is important because SB62 feeds into COP30. So adaptation did have a center role in Bonn. And when we think about adaptation, we're focusing on adaptation, SB62 tackled some big and complex issues, which we'll discuss today. Our presenters will unpack them one by one. Here's a quick overview of what we'll talk about today. So it's technical, there's a lot of jargon and there's a lot of acronym, but fear not, our presenters will unpack those. But just to run you through what we'll talk about, we'll start with the indicators for measuring progress toward the global goal on adaptation. We'll talk about transformational adaptation, the Baku adaptation roadmap, national adaptation plans, adaptation finance, as well as other areas. I just wanted to share some photos because actually IISD shared a lot of photos, and I wanted to give you a visual of what SBs looks like. And often this is what people picture when they think about the Bonn Climate Change Conference. But actually there's a lot of, it also very much looks like this, people gathering, huddling behind the formal sessions. So I'll leave it at that. I will now pass on the floor to our three speakers, and we will kick off with the global goal on adaptation and specifically indicators for measuring progress, which really was one of the key pieces under negotiation and discussion in Bonn. So I'm going to turn over to you, Katy, to kind of set the stage for this first piece and explain to us, what is the GGA, why does it matter, and why do these indicators matter? But before you do so, or as part of your answer, I wonder if you could also just give us a quick 30-second overview of what it felt like to be in Bonn.
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Elise, and it's a pleasure to be here today, also with Pilar and Lina. Fantastic panel. As you've shown, I think adaptation is really fragmented. It's split across a number of different agenda items under the UNFCCC negotiations. And so having a space like this where we pull it all together and reflect across all those different items, I think is really critical. What did it feel like to be in Bonn? I felt very optimistic in the first week. It felt like a lot of the discussions, certainly within the discussions on indicators, were constructive and progressing well. And then in the second week, it felt, that old tensions resumed, that emotions ran high, that a lot of the discussions and sort of consensus building took place in the corridors and through huddles rather than on the floor. But generally speaking, Bonn is a fantastic place to... don't know, Elise, if you could try and mute some of our participants, but just for now. Yeah, it felt... I mean, it's always much smaller than the COPs. So I think something like 1,300 people or so are in Bonn, compared to sometimes we have up to 80,000 at the COPs. It's a smaller, more focused space. It's a great time for those to for observers and parties to mingle, to talk, to interact. You see each other a lot more than you do, given it's a smaller venue than the COPs. And it's exciting. It's where a lot of the, as you say, the preparations really get underway for the COPs, and for you to be able to, as an observer, get a sense of the lay of the land and what we might be heading into for the COPs each year. But I won't say any more on that at the moment. I'm sure Lina and Pilar will add to that. And I will just give you a bit of the background. I'm not going to talk about what happened in Bonn on the indicators, because I'll leave that to Pilar and Lina. But really, to understand what happened in Bonn last week, we have to go all the way back to 2015, when the Paris Agreement established the global goal on adaptation of, and I quote, enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change, with a view to contributing to sustainable development and ensuring an adequate adaptation response in the context of the temperature goal of limiting warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees. That was the language on the global goal on adaptation that was when it was established in the Paris Agreement. And the problem has been for the last 10 years that beyond this wording, the goal was never clearly defined or understood or operationalized, certainly in comparison to the mitigation goal, a temperature goal. So in an effort to sort this out, 4 years ago at COP26 in Glasgow, parties launched a 2-year work programme. It was informally called the GLASS, or the Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh work programme on the global goal on adaptation. And the following year at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, parties initiated the development of a framework for the global goal on adaptation, or the GGA. And this was called, when it was formally adopted in Dubai, so that's 2 years ago at COP28, it's called the UAE Framework for Global Climate Resilience. So this is the framework that essentially helped to try and operationalize the global goal on adaptation. It included a range of thematic and dimensional targets for climate adaptation and resilience. And that same COP also established the 2-year UAE to Belém work programme. So this work programme aimed to develop indicators for measuring progress achieved towards the targets that were outlined in this framework. Now, last year in Bonn, so a year ago, parties agreed to convene groups of technical experts to essentially whittle down and refine almost 10,000 indicators, potential indicators that have been submitted to this work programme. And at COP29 in Baku, say 6 months ago, they agreed that there should be no more than 100 of these. So this brings us up to 2025. So ahead of Bonn this year, these amazing groups of experts, there was one group for each thematic target, and then one group for all the dimensional targets together, submitted their refined lists. And this brought the total number of indicators sort of being considered down from almost 10,000 down to 490. And in Bonn, a workshop took place involving experts and negotiators, where we heard parties' views on these indicators for the first time. And then negotiations took place on what further guidance to give, sort of both procedural and substantive, in order to tee up a final decision on these indicators in Belém. And I'm going to stop there because I think we'd really like to hear from Pilar and Lina then on what happened in Bonn. But one last 2-minute point. So why does this all matter? It might seem super technical, but the lack of defined definitions, targets, and indicators, I think many would say, has really stalled progress on adaptation for years. And the sort of clarity that this could bring could really help elevate adaptation on the political agenda. And many expect these indicators to reflect what gets defined, assessed, planned, implemented, funded, monitored, and reported on as adaptation for years to come. So I think we can expect a lot of political wrangling over what gets included or excluded in this indicator set. And as you'll hear now, that was already very evident in Bonn. So hopefully that sets the scene. And I'm sure, everyone's keen to now to hear from Pilar and Lina on what happened.
Thanks, Katy. Great. That's really helpful. Now turning over to you, Lina and Pilar, what do you think is important that these indicators capture and why, and also what happened in Bonn? Was progress made? What were the setbacks? So maybe if we can start with Lina, over to you, and then we'll hand over the floor to Pilar.
Thanks a lot, Elise and Katy, and thanks for bringing this webinar together. It's really a nice space to just debrief and talk frankly about what happened in Bonn. I was really hoping you would start with Pilar, just so I can have the easier job of coming in and filling maybe some of the gaps, but I'm sure there wouldn't have been any. But yeah, on just also maybe some context for people looking at this picture. This is a little bit of a miserable picture because all of us look tired. This picture was taken on the very last day of Bonn in the morning. Someone is... yeah, okay, sounds good. Yeah, just context that this picture is taken on the last morning of Bonn. We were already 4 hours into the DGA session trying to finalize the text. There were key things that are left pending. And little did we know this was going to be a day that extended to midnight and was escalated to a head of delegation level conversation eventually because we were stuck. But yeah, just maybe a quick summary of what we hope to achieve in Bonn and then what happened, but I would leave a lot for Pilar to cover because she'll do that more eloquently anyway. So coming to Bonn, we wanted to try and make sure we set the ground and running for Belém. So we, as Katy mentioned, had those 10,000 indicators. Experts were working on refining them, streamlining them. We had 2 workshops since those experts been hired or chosen. One was in October last year, and then one this year in March. That experts came together, tried to work on a list, and tried to basically decode what we told them in Baku. One key challenge that those experts have been facing is that besides being experts on their different fields like water, health, infrastructure, they also overnight had to become experts on UN language. And this is not an easy task. I've been to 9 COPs and I still learn something new every COP. So it's not easy, and they had to somehow figure out how to work around the ambiguity and the vagueness of some of the language and guidance that we give them. But nevertheless, they've done an excellent job by giving us 490 indicators for now. And we had a workshop on the very first day of Bonn where experts presented this to the negotiators, talked through their thinking and the structure. And it was evident that experts needed more guidance from us. And that's what negotiators wanted to prioritize. So even though there were a lot of other things to discuss, we all agreed that without clear guidance between now and Belém, experts will not be able to refine this list further, bring us closer to the 100 number. So this is what we prioritized in Bonn and tried to work on for 2 weeks, I would say. And most groups wanted to prioritize that conversation. But then the tricky part is, how do we give guidance that is specific enough for them to understand, but also leaves room for experts' judgment? So negotiators, and specifically the DCEN7 group, was concerned about guidance on means of implementation. Means of implementation here refers to finance, capacity building, and technology transfer. This is the heart of the framework, because at the end of the day, for many developing countries, this framework and these targets are meant to show where gaps are, where needs are, and allow countries to better access finance for adaptation. So The interpretation of means of implementation from experts was not what we expected. If you look at the indicators list, one of the key things that negotiators highlighted is that the indicators look at ODA finance, they look at national budget allocation, expenditure tracking, and while these might be relevant and useful, this framework at the end of the day established under the Paris Agreement and under the UNFCCC, so it is about tracking financial flows inside this mechanism, and that has very clear definition. So the key fight in Bonn, or not fight, but debate was that how do we make sure the experts know what we mean by climate finance, by technology transfer and by capacity building. And we've been looking at a set of guidance that we were trying to give them. Most of the guidance wasn't contentious. Some of it was around making sure indicators are measurable rather than just statements, because some of those are just statements. It was about avoiding duplication, making sure the adaptation relevance is strong enough, because some of the indicators seem to track things like sea level rise, but it wasn't really clear how is that adaptation, where's the adaptation angle. So some of the guidance wasn't contentious, but then the guidance on means of implementation was contentious because our partners from developed countries also wanted to track what they call enablers for adaptation or enabling conditions. And that's looking at leadership, institutional capacity, governance. There's a set of what enablers mean from the Dubai decision that established a framework. And it really sadly turned into a back and forth debate about which one is important and which one should be prioritized by experts. And at a technical level, that conversation could not conclude. And this is why you see in this picture, this is G77 huddling, trying to figure out a middle ground. Unfortunately, all the efforts from G77 and developing countries to put forward a proposal that allows us to focus on means of implementation as well as consider enablers was rejected by developed countries. And we had to then defer this conversation to our head of delegations, who they met and had a meeting that started at 7 p.m. It ended, I want to say, around 10 p.m. But I'll let Pilar maybe unpack that a little bit more. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Lina. Pilar, over to you.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you to Katy for the invitation too. It's an honor to be here with all of you, and also thank you to share the panel with Lina. As she explained very well, during these 2 weeks, there were many challenges for technical and also, of course, political conversation in the context of Bonn negotiations. With respect to the first question that you made, that is why is important, I think Katy already took that, but I want to mention one or two things on that. From my view, first of all, because we heard from many years from a mitigation-centric perspective that it was too difficult technically and also politically to assess adaptation at the global level, that adaptation is too specific, that the main approaches are community-based and local. So to assess at the global level is sometimes, we heard, impossible, in other cases not even something to pursue. As Lina explained very well, and I will not repeat, I completely agreed. And also Katy, we are here after some years with 10 years of development after the Paris Agreement, understanding that both things are important at the same time and they don't need to compete, but to complement each other. That means that we can really continue to support adaptation at the community and local level and understand how important is that, but at the same time to assess progress at the global level of action and support, as also Lina explained. So we already know that the gap in terms of finance is huge and is increasing every time. We already know that by the adaptation gap report of UNEP, by the Standing Committee of Finance, even OECD. We have some information from these places to understand better. But indeed, if you still ask more information in terms of how this gap links directly to the 11 targets, there are many gaps in terms of information and also of understanding of adaptation action. So I believe that the implementation of the framework, of the indicators per se, really need to help us to start to fill those blanks. So what happened in Bonn, I will not repeat that. I will go to what I understand were some of the main battles or things that we didn't, we still are struggling together, because in some cases it is very polarized between North and South. In other cases, I think that we are all trying to be in that common understanding of things. So my first point is that still we don't have not a North-South understanding of this architecture of the indicators. So we are still trying to see, or in many cases not even doing that, how the final list will link to this understanding, this comprehensive vision with respect to the indicators, to avoid really the additional burden for developing countries that we heard many times, and we have in the Paris Agreement and many decisions. I also make this, I always make this point, because just to have a list in an annex in the decision of Belém, it is something concerning from my point of view. So I didn't see still in Bonn that discussion on how the indicators will link to all the other parts of the adaptation story that we already have at the international level, but also how that is linked to all the other pieces of adaptation as a multi-level action and support, etc. So that comprehensive vision still a concern from my part, and something that didn't happen. Secondly, I think it was clear that cross-cutting considerations are still not a priority for many of the countries and groups, and that is also, from my view, is concerning, because we haven't gotten here, and for not having really disaggregated data in terms of gender or human rights approaches. So that was also clear from conversations, that for many countries, even the ones saying this is important for us, at the moment of choosing numbers, then this was not a priority, and it's not a judgment at all, it's position. So to understand together why this has happened, if there is a margin to improve it together. So what is the real role of cross-cutting considerations in the implementation of the framework through the indicators? And also the subcomponents. I think that the issue of the subcomponents for our audience, when we talk about subcomponents, you will see that the targets, the 11 targets, the 4 dimensions, the 7 themes, in general are like very long phrases. When you try to divide these long phrases in different parts, these are the subcomponents. So you will find between 2 and 4 in general subcomponents by for each of the 11 targets. And I really believe, from Dubai to here, that the richness of the framework and the sub-goals is really in the subcomponents. So to have something very general, just one indicator, very general, assessing progress on the first phrase of the target, could be something that really reduces the ambition of the whole framework. And that is also something concerning. My last point, very quickly, is on the political discussion on means of implementation, as Lina expressed. Really, the level of conversation in Bonn was very, I mean, what we are used to, but I think that we are suffering the effects of what happened in Baku. Unfortunately, even with an NCQG already adopted, the deep feeling, in particular from developing countries, that this was unfair in outcome and process, that adaptation and loss and damage weren't there, that we don't have a particular quantum for adaptation and loss and damage, that we don't have quality, that we have every time more depth in terms of paying our own adaptation actions. So that feeling, that is not more concern, is another kind of feeling that is at all something good in terms of multilateral negotiation that need to build trust among the parties. That feeling that was hidden in every negotiator and the countries and their position was very alive there in every discussion. And at the very last moment, as Lina explaining this, even this picture, people saying why we are here again, why we are discussing as appropriate between commas or enablers, including means of implementation. So it was like uncomfortable, and that feeling make Belém even more difficult, because if in Bonn we were in that situation of even trying to give guidance to the experts to develop indicators, technical indicators for means of implementation, and we heard from countries that to develop indicators on finance is something political and not technical exclusively. So that's kind of nuances, I think, that can make conversations a little bit difficult, but still hopeful. I don't want to leave the first round with a taste or a flavor that we are lost. We are not. Altogether, I think that we can have a good outcome, but for sure we will have an opportunity to continue discussing.
Thanks, Pilar. So hopefully you can see how technical and also contentious those discussions are, but also how important they are for adaptation, because it will have implication for what gets prioritized and funded. Katy, quick turn over to you, and then we will turn to the next point, to the next agenda.
Yeah, thanks so much. Just to add concretely, and I think this will come up again later when we talk about COP30, but concretely, important to say that the expert groups will have a chance to continue their work. This was a big topic of discussion over the 2 weeks, whether the expert groups would have a chance to continue or whether it already transitioned to a political process, but they will, and will have until August and to take on board the guidance and the feedback that came from these negotiations. They will have one additional workshop where experts will meet. It will be an online workshop that will be taking place in advance of that. And then there will be one further workshop that was already a mandated workshop where parties and experts will meet ahead of Belém. So that will be a chance for everyone to discuss and continue those deliberations that Pilar and Lina have discussed. And please do read the text. We can share some links, but just to see what was finally agreed with regard to means of implementation, with regard to some of those other key points of debate over those 2 weeks around indicators related to ODA or national budgets or around cross-cutting considerations. Yeah, do take a look at the final text, and I'll post that in the chat now. Thanks.
Great. Thanks all. We're now moving on to the next issue, and we're going to zoom in a little bit more quickly with the other ones, but the GGA and the indicator really was one of the major blocks. So if we now move on to transformational adaptation, Katy, I know you're typing in the chat, but when you've done that, you can maybe just give us a 1 minute setting the stage around, what transformational adaptation is and really why it mattered. Why was it a topic of focus in Bonn?
Yeah, sure. No, really happy to do that. I've just posted a note, a comment with the chat. There was also an informal note agreed that I'm just going to link to as well. Anyway, so everyone's got the links. Transformational adaptation. Okay, so the concept of transformational adaptation dates back to 2012 to an IPCC special report. And 2 years ago in Dubai, so at the COP in Dubai, parties requested the UNFCCC Secretariat to examine how transformational adaptation is defined and understood across various sectors and scales, and to assess progress in its planning and implementation at the global level. Now, the Secretariat prepared and published a technical paper that was released during COP29. And that was swiftly followed by a mandate from parties at COP29 for the Secretariat to produce a more reader-friendly summary. So according to that summary, transformational adaptation changes the fundamental attributes of a socio-ecological system in response to climate change and its effects. This results in significant changes in the structure or function of the system, going beyond adjusting existing practices and leading to new strategies or resource systems. It involves transforming places and triggering deep and long-term societal changes, including through changes in values and worldviews. So that's the definition of transformational adaptation that was released in that summary. That summary was released in April 2025, and it forms the backdrop for the discussions in transformational adaptation in Bonn. The concept has proved to be a divisive one between parties, and I'll turn now to back to you, Elise, to then hand on the floor for those discussions.
Pilar, why don't you get started this time round? Do you want to share with us what your take on that was?
Sure. Thank you both again for the question. I think transformational adaptation is still a concept under development or construction in particular, and that covers political, technical, social, economic, and any other dimension of our conversations. The maturity of the concept at all that dimensions is still, or need to be still, put under discussion. So to make as if transformational adaptation is something that we all understand together and we have the same vision and we all it applies to all contexts, and I mean is not. So there are many questions with respect to what is transformational adaptation, how it applies to different contexts, national but also local context. Was it developed for only some particular geographical, political realities, or can be applied to other contexts? And in many cases, we don't have still case studies at different regions to understand the implications. From my personal view, what we have seen in the last 2 years with respect to transformational adaptation at the UNFCCC level is the politicization of a concept that didn't need to be treated in that way. In this discussion of the GGA, it was completely unnecessary. I believe that we have enough complexity with all the other features of this discussion. And it doesn't mean we don't need to discuss transformational adaptation. All on the contrary, what I regret or believe is it was not necessary is to put it in the middle of these other battles, all these other discussions. So what we saw in Bonn was that many countries, many groups elaborated a little bit more with respect to their concerns. There are not ghosts. They are not things that, oh, I fear that in the future it can be X or Y. But countries saying, I don't understand how this applies to my context. why we are talking just about transformation adaptation and not about many other approaches that the adaptation committee had worked. I remember the paper on multiple approaches that the AC prepared 5-6 years ago. Also part of this discussion, trying to see there are as many adaptations as countries, communities in the world. So why we are again trying to narrow that discussion to say there is only one way and something that we don't even understand. So it's not against transformational, it's in favor of multiple approach and to really understand more the implications of all these approaches, and also to give the space and the freedom to the community still that they are the ones that have known forever how to really adapt and help the communities to develop, to support their own techniques, their own capacities in order to develop adaptation strategies and solutions. So yeah, I believe that was like the good bad part, that struggle we saw, but also the good signal was that countries and groups started to open more that box of trying to give more details, additional to one that is very specific and important, that is the political and economic conditionality that we are already seeing in the funds, in the financial mechanism, that is not just the cost, is there. But not only that even it has a, big weight, but all the other features. So I think that was the good part of the discussion, to understand better.
Thanks, Pilar. Lina, I'm turning over to you, and we're a little bit behind schedule, so maybe if you have your sort of 1 to 2 minute takeaway on transformational adaptation, that would be fabulous.
Thanks, Elise. I really think Pilar covered it all. I think one thing that I find unfortunate, and Pilar said it, is the fact that it's been added as another element that we need to discuss in an already very substantive agenda item and the GGA. But to me, what I find disappointing is that it's almost used as a card, negotiation card. If once we want to talk about means of implementation and finance, we hear, oh, let's talk about transformation adaptation, because now it's becoming a trigger word for a lot of developing countries. And that's not how you get useful ideas. If there's an idea that the scientific community is yet to have a clear definition for, it is a horrible idea to bring it to the politician and the political space, because it's only going to get more complicated and more contentious. So from our side, one thing that we've made very clear in Bonn is that if we're being forced to talk about transformation adaptation first, even the paper itself says it's not yet widely applicable in a lot of sectors, and it's a complex topic. So if we're talking about complex, large-scale changes, we need to talk about the resources needed. If countries are being forced to consider it, we should also have an acknowledgement of how much it costs, how much capacity technology is needed for it to actually become a reality. If this is what the ideal adaptation is, even though Pilar outlined that there are a lot of other adaptation approaches, and the line is very blurry between what is incremental and what is transformational. So it's a shame that the idea, even though it has potential and a lot of opportunities, is being used and weaponized against developing countries, and I don't think this serves the case in the long term. So that's just one observation.
Thanks, Lina. So the next item under adaptation is the Baku adaptation roadmap. So another jargony term, but hopefully, Katy, you can explain what the bar is and why it was important. And then we'll turn to Lina directly, and then Pilar for a 1 to 2 minute, your 1 to 2 minute takeaway on the bar.
Thanks so much, Elise. And just to say, just sneaking in here, on transformational adaptation, I mean, SCI, for instance, also Adaptation Without Borders, has been doing a lot of work that I think is relevant to thinking about adaptation in sort of transformational terms, or if we're looking at sort of whole systems change. And I think I would agree here that this is an area where many people on this call, from research institutions, from think tanks, from those that can really add value to sort of explore and increase the evidence base when it comes to better defining and understanding transformational adaptation, as indeed we've done with many other adaptation approaches, community-based, ecosystems are based, and that is ongoing. So would just like to call for this community here to really try and help support the negotiations on this topic with more of an evidence base on this topic. But yeah, Baku Adaptation Roadmap, also known as the BAR. It's a framework, another one. Don't know if, like me, you're slightly drowning in all the different frameworks, but it was established at COP29 last year to provide a forward-looking pathway beyond COP30 to advance the GGA, the Global Goal on Adaptation. So the BAR provides a vehicle or a home for many discussions to continue that sort of fell beyond the purview of the Baku to Belém work programme on indicators very specifically. And it aimed to cover a lot of the issues commonly referred to as paragraph 38 issues, where there was a lot of discussion on these. But I think it's fair to say on the BAR, there's still a lot of questions from negotiators, from observers on what the BAR is, what its purpose is, the modalities, its mandates, its timeline, its structure, its alignment with other processes, and all those questions. So if you've got a lack of clarity on the BAR, you're not alone. I would tend to maybe Lina, you can come in first now. Just what were the discussions in Bonn on the BAR? What progress was made? Was anything agreed?
Thanks a lot, Katy. And I think I fully agree. No, we don't really understand the BAR, but that's the beauty of this process. You kind of figure things out along the way. Might not be ideal, but this is how it works, really. So in terms of the Baku adaptation roadmap, just after Baku, COP29, and before and between Baku and SB, we had a window of submission for countries and groups to submit what they think the Baku adaptation roadmap should be. There were a lot of submissions received, a lot of content in there and ideas. I think there's a really nice synthesis that the UN Foundation prepared for some of those, and I'm happy to share the link later. That gives you a general sense of what parties see it as. But generally speaking, and I think it's safe to say for most developing countries, the Baku adaptation roadmap, even though it's an idea that emerged in Baku and was just agreed upon, but without actual content, it is potentially the space for discussion and implementation of the framework beyond agreeing on the indicators and beyond agreeing on this Belém package. That what comes next, Baku adaptation roadmap sounds like the space that could potentially host these conversations. In addition to what Katy said on paragraph 38, there are a lot of elements that we are yet to unpack all of them. So that sounds like a good space to host them there. But in terms of what happened in Bonn specifically, it was agreed that it's not a time-sensitive issue. We should start unpacking it, but there is no expectation to finish the conversation in Bonn. The more time-sensitive and urgent conversations were around the guidance to the experts, the work on indicators. So what happened is parties shared their views. So a lot of groups came in with their proposals for what the modalities for the roadmap should be. Some even proposed a timeline and like an end date and a review process. And all of that was captured in an informal note that is now will be used as the basis for negotiation in Belém. So this is really good because those of you who were part of the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program, you will remember that we had 8 workshops, discussed a lot of technical things, came to Dubai COP33 with nothing to start the negotiation with. We had to start from scratch and it was impossible to get a text. This time we have already flushed out some ideas, even though the informal note, and you should read it, it does include a lot of options, but at least parties can now build from there. And it does actually put us in a much better position than we were in Dubai. But just as a very short answer, nothing was agreed on the Baku adaptation roadmap. All of this will be carried to Belém, and hopefully there we will have some agreement on what it would look like and how it can take shape.
Pilar, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you. Just to say maybe that what I heard from the floor, from parties and groups was still different in this not very extensive conversation, because as Lina said, it was more focused on the immediate guidance that parties need to give to the experts. But still there was one conversation that is included right now in that document in the footnote as work in progress and the basis for negotiation in Belém. But still I saw different understandings. Some people saying this should be the adaptation agenda. Everything should be there. All the gaps in terms of implementation of Article 7 of the Paris Agreement. So some countries and groups being very comprehensive with respect to the scope of the roadmap. I will not talk about a framework, but a roadmap in this case. And others being like more pragmatic in terms of Article 38, the bridge with GST2, the conversation about adaptation in the GST and what needs to happen to assess adaptation, and the 5 components that we indeed have. So, and of course, in between, many other things. But this spectrum of different views with respect to what really the bar is and how the modalities will be developed is still there. And I think we need like more work inside the countries and groups to understand better which are the implications of these different views.
Thank you, Pilar. Now, moving on to another big topic, national adaptation plans, or NAPs. Unfortunately, we won't have as much time as I wish we had for this specific topic. But Katy, maybe you can just very briefly tell us what are NAPs, why are they important, and what place did they have in Bonn?
You're doing a great job, Elise. There's a lot of agenda items to get through. Pilar, Lina, thanks for keeping up with the pace as well. So NAPs, National Adaptation Plans, the main ways in which countries identify their medium and long-term adaptation needs and develop and implement strategies and programs to address them. So in the past, the COP has implemented 2 assessments on progress in the process to formulate and implement NAPs, one in 2015, one in 2018. During COP26, parties requested the SBI to initiate another assessment of progress in the process to formulate and implement NAPs that was due, they said, that should kick off in Bonn last year. And that they should make recommendations on this matter for consideration and adoption at COP29. Now, those negotiations did not conclude in Baku. So the COP requested the SBI to continue consideration of these in Bonn with a view to recommending a draft decision for consideration and adoption now in Belém. So that's the background on the negotiations on NAPs. And Pilar, in 1 minute or 2 minutes, what happened in Bonn? Give it your best.
Unfortunately, I can't cover in 1 or 2 minutes because what happened was very limited. So
go for it. We can run over.
Thank you. Indeed, as you said, the discussion about NAPs has been stuck for some time now. We have a text coming for some sessions, and this is a very clear example of polarization between North and South discussion. In other cases, it's not, but this is an example. The main troubles are related to the paragraphs of means of implementation, and in particular on the lack of resources for implementing the NAPs. So developing countries really requesting the room to say, we need some kind of acknowledgement and recognition that NAPs have progressed, in many cases with own money, but implementation is slow. In many cases, it's not happening at the pace it should happen, as the adaptation gap report has been reflected. And this is mainly because the resources are not coming, and we need some recognition and some, not only recognition, but also the next step. So how we are going to solve that. And that is not happening. So NAPs, what we see is NAP being hostage of all the other discussions. So like in the middle of all the other conversations on the GGA, on the AC, on the outcomes, or any other one. So not good news for this agenda item. And I think that it could be very important to really try to untie the big issues in Belém. So a new approach is needed, because if we continue trying the same formulas, I don't really believe we will be able to do it. So yeah, very short and for my part, but maybe Lina has more beautiful ideas on how to solve it.
No pressure, Lina.
No ideas on how to solve it. I just want to say it's the most disappointing agenda item on adaptation, and it's a shame because it is one of the most important and the one with the biggest legacy. But it's clear that countries have done a lot. The least developed countries, half of them have NAPs ready, but none of those have actually been able to progress in terms of accessing funding for implementation. So it is very fair for developing countries to be very loud in this room and say, we need an acknowledgement that the system has failed us, and on top of that, we need to change the status quo. And how do we change that? And unfortunately, it's getting stuck in technicalities and wordings and brackets, but also in Bonn, absolutely nothing happened. And I don't think this should go unnoticed. This is a big deal that in 2 weeks, nothing has moved forward. The text that we had from Baku, all that happened is developing countries, DSN7 took it, added headlines to it, so to structure it a little bit, and then wanted to use it and start narrowing down and like streamlining. There was no willingness to do so, and we ended up with exactly the same text from Baku. So 2 weeks, no results, and that should be a big warning. And I think things need to change, but I really don't think the change is from developing countries side. The political willingness and then the acknowledgement that things need to shift needs to come from developed countries, and they need to come with a renewed spirit in Belém.
Thanks, Lina. Another connected and another very large topic of discussion, adaptation finance. Katy, do kick us off, and then we'll head over to Lina and Pilar.
Great. Well, you've been hearing means of implementation come up a lot, which is the sort of the broader term within which finance is referred to in the negotiations. So in a way, we've been talking about finance throughout this discussion. But yeah, so just a few sort of recent updates. So in Baku, there was negotiated the Baku to Belém roadmap, which aims to mobilize at least $1.3 trillion annually by 2035 from all public and private sources to support climate action in developing countries. This forms part of the new collective quantified goal, or NCQG, that committed developed countries to take the lead in mobilizing 300 billion per year by 2035 for developing countries. So that's what came out of Baku. Now, the Baku to Belém roadmap, it wasn't, and the NCQG wasn't a formal negotiating agenda item in Bonn. There were informal sessions on it, or not informal consultations, but there were open dialogues on the topic. But it meant that sort of the question of finance arose in many other agenda items, particularly without this home to discuss it. So the Baku to Belém roadmap is intended to support developing countries in the implementation of NDCs and NAPs, but it didn't include a specific target on adaptation finance. The current commitment, in which developed countries promised to double collective finance for adaptation to developing countries back in 2019, runs out this year. So the question was left without negotiations on this in Bonn. The question arose, which agenda items could a commitment on adaptation finance be leveraged, and what ambition level was possible? So these were questions we were wondering going into Bonn. And again, I will turn maybe first to Lina and then to Pilar to share any additional thoughts in addition to those that you've already talked about on sort of adaptation finance. What did you see? Was there any consensus? Was there any outcomes? Over to you.
Thanks, Katy. I think the fact that there's no specific room to discuss adaptation finance is the reason why a lot of adaptation, other technical rooms, as they like to refer to them, are stuck. Because what's the point of discussing the technicalities of adaptation and how countries are going to do them if the resources are not being assured in any other room? So, and this is, I think, also evident from the different bruises that all of us came out of from Baku. Baku was not the best outcome for a lot of countries. It was a betrayal, disappointment, and even an attack at the multilateralism and how much it can really achieve. So I think it's this is a natural response that negotiators are frustrated and they need to find a room to talk about adaptation finance. One of the things that I'd like to point out here is that some groups, like the least developed countries, the LDC group, has already said now that the doubling of adaptation finance is expiring, we need a new commitment, renewed spirit, and that commitment should be a tripling of the doubling. So there are some proposals on the table that, but the issue is without a room to discuss them, and it's unfortunate that when we want to talk about everything, we get rooms and formal consultations, but when we want to talk about finance, we get dialogues, and we have to wait until 2035 to talk about it. So in terms of the proposal from the least developed countries, it's about tripling the doubling pledge, but also delivering this by 2030, because to actively choosing to wait 10 years is us actively choosing to let people die because funding won't be made available. So it's about bringing that commitment forward, delivering some of it, and giving adaptation the attention it deserves. But also, this wasn't the only proposal on the table. There are a lot of other loud voices on why adaptation finance need to be addressed, and there has been a mention of it in the GGA room itself that I will let Pilar maybe unpack.
Thank you, Lina. So I take from there to say that completely agree that there are some different features with respect to adaptation finance being under discussion, or some countries trying to push for those discussions, while others understand still that there is no room formally and informally for those. So still that discussion on housing all these topics. Which topics? As she mentioned, the new pledge on adaptation finance after Glasgow, but also other features, including the relationship with the NCQG. We already have one paragraph in the Baku decision, but it's a very narrative one. So we really understand that it will be good to link it better, not only through the indicators of means of implementation, but also to understand how the NCQG and the Baku to Belém roadmap in terms of the gap of 1.3 billion will really help to achieve the 11 targets, something that we still don't know because we don't even know the cost of achieving the 11 targets, something that is not really good in terms of negotiating what countries are negotiating right now. So there are gaps of information right now that needs to be filled. Also, with respect to other methodological provisions, because it's not only the quantum, but also quality, access, and many other things that the countries have been discussing for some time. It's not only the number is very important for sure, but also all the other things and how that link to the GGA discussion, the NAPS discussion, the relationship between the GGA and the NAPS. That is not only one target, but also all the dimensional targets, because NAP process is about that. I mean, the 4 dimensions of the adaptation cycle, and of course, all the themes. So there are a number of things, and not only money, financial provisions. We saw in the Standing Committee of Finance all these methodological gaps with respect to the Glasgow package and the doubling adaptation finance that we expect to be solved in a second round, but also about technology and capacity building, because countries will need, with a framework complete, will need to really build capacities around the world and in all levels to implement and also to adjust their MEL systems, their monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems, in case they have them. And if they don't have them, still to really develop these new systems and this new understanding on how these different levels can really talk to each other.
Thanks, Pilar. So we need to wrap up, but what I suggest we do, and apologies, it's a bit of a sprint. So well done to Katy, Lina, and Pilar for doing such a good job at explaining in such a short time. What we're going to do now is, I know there's a few other issues that were discussed and negotiated at Bonn. Maybe I'll leave it open to you to flag anything else you think is important. And then we'll turn, while you have the floor, I think that's also really important for us to focus on. You can also talk about what are your hopes for COP30? So both in the lead up to COP30, but also at COP30, what should be prioritized? What does SB62 mean for COP30? So Katy, over to you. Anything else that you want to share about SB62 and then looking ahead?
Great, thanks. I think I'll leave it there. I was following transboundary climate risks very closely. For anybody who wants to know more on that, you have my details, drop me a line. Pilar, maybe you could say just a couple of words on adaptation communications, the review of the adaptation committee and the Nairobi work programme, where there was some news. I will just say just a couple of words looking ahead to COP30. So where did I see progress made in Bonn? Well, I think in developing clear guidance for the further refinement of adaptation indicators on the path from Bonn to Belém. I think we are clear on what that path now looks like over the next few months. And I think that was essential that we got that clarity in Bonn and it was achieved in terms of the process. So that for me was really important. Setbacks, I would say, was the traditional fault lines between parties becoming further entrenched, particularly on finance. And what's at stake for COP30? Well, I think that Brazil has flagged the global goal on adaptation as a top priority. But as we've heard over the course of the last hour, turning technical progress into political consensus is going to really demand deft diplomacy all the way from Bonn to Belém. So a call for the Brazilian presidency taking us into COP30 to use all of its diplomatic heft to support and sherpa this process through. I'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
Who would like to take the floor? Pilar, Lina? Do you want to go, Pilar?
Sure. So in terms of the other issues, in the first week, I think we had an opportunity to have a good outcome on the Nairobi Work Programme, a program that is the first pace we had for adaptation ever at the UNFCCC. In 2005, so 20 years of the adaptation of the Nairobi Work Programme for adaptation and vulnerability and risk and impacts, working in particular for developing countries, but for all countries. So it was at some point fair on the anniversary also the recognition of this role. Of course, this is an underfinanced program with a very small staff team. So, I mean, is very important to see which will be the possibilities of new mandates coming from Belém to give like a new life to this space, not because we need to give it anyways, but because it's the space where in order to support knowledge building and capacity building in terms of knowledge in particular. So, and there is, for example, one feature of BAR, of the 5 BAR features that is focused on that. So I personally see an opportunity there. With respect to the AC, I think that's the most, the obscure picture we have. The worst phase of the untrust, the governance discussion, and that is to unpack what that means is even difficult in the time that we have. But just to say that there are very different views with respect to the role of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, and how the CMA and the COP work together for different mandates. And that's what we call, in some words, the governance issue. It was not solved, and it's one of the only bodies where this has not been solved. And really, the reputation of this body, very important body for developing countries, is under discussion. And so, yeah, I think that the AC need to be considered as it is at the highest level, from the head of delegations, and trying to see how we can solve it. Really, we were very near, but we couldn't. Really, the review didn't happen, so I cannot even talk about content on what the performance of the AC. And with respect to adaptation communications, this was the first time we saw this agenda item. I saw a good performance of a new agenda item, a discussion that was at least a starting point in terms of the 70 countries that had already submitted an adaptation communication, the submissions that some countries and groups already presented to the UNFCCC, making some remarks on their experiences and preparing adaptation communications, the needs, and the review that need to take place. So there are some ideas that still need to be landed, like the timeline. So that will be discussed again next year in the next Bonn, so which will be the timeline for the review of the adaptation communication guidance that is in one specific decision, that is the 9CMA1, and also the role of some of the bodies in that regard. But I think that was a medium good discussion. It was not one of the worst discussion in comparison with the other one. So I would make like a spectrum of good Nairobi, very, very bad AC, and outcomes in the middle.
Lina?
Thanks, Alice. Maybe I can just come in. I feel like everything has been said. So I'll come in with a call to action for everyone who managed to stay an hour and 15 minutes and listening to us yabbing about the UNFCCC. You obviously care, but you also, you deeply care, and there's a lot you can add. So maybe my call to action is for Belém, and we've heard it from the presidency, they do want adaptation to be the biggest agenda item, but they can't do this alone. All they can do is try and elevate it politically, but the hard work has to be done at a technical level, and setting the ground up between now and Belém is really important. There are key opportunities. Someone mentioned the Africa Climate Summit, and I was going to say that that's going to be in Ethiopia, Addis, where adaptation is on the table. There's going to be a discussion on the nexus between climate and health. So there are a lot of opportunities in which you can engage. And let's not forget that there will also be the NAP Expo, which is happening a little bit later in the year this time. It's going to be in Zambia in August. So there are opportunities between now for adaptation and elevating the conversation between now and Belém. But more importantly, all of you do a lot of amazing work and a lot of evidence-based research that could be of use to negotiators. Negotiators have to go through a lot of materials and be able to digest a lot of information and make sense of it at a political level. But this is where your role comes in. And I really think if we can have such spaces between now and Belém to think through what can be done and how everyone can contribute to the adaptation agenda, that would be really valuable and again a good use of our time together between now and November. So that's my call to action.
Perfect. Thank you. And Pilar, do you have any final thoughts on COP30? And then Katy, there's a question on transboundary risk that I may let you answer, and then we'll wrap up.
Very brief. I think that the Brazilian presidency, the incoming presidency, has a key role to play, really trying to put the pieces, and in a way, I don't want to say that put them in one specific order, because now there are many images that can be the outcome of the puzzle, but to help all the parties and groups to really build that trust that need to be built for a good outcome, in particular for adaptation. We have the ingredients. We have an interesting agenda we have an interesting outcome to have on the indicators and all these other pieces. So to build that synergy between the pieces, that architecture that we need to really finalize all together, I think that the role and the leading role of the Brazilian presidency that I see that they really are willing to play. So that's a good news for the process, for the UNFCCC and multilateralism right now, that Brazil is really prepared to have that leadership that we are waiting to have. Of course, to know that they will not solve all the problems alone. So, but to have that leadership, I think that is something interesting already. I'm very happy that COP is coming back to Latin American region, our region after 11 years, because the last time we had a COP was in Lima. Unfortunately, Santiago didn't happen in our territory, let's say. So yeah, it's very nice to see again COP in LAC.
Thanks, Pilar. Wonderful. Katy, there was a question on transboundary for you. Transboundary risk. Would you like me to read it again, or should we just do that over email?
I think we've covered it, but just to say, we are working hard within Adaptation Without Borders to support the technical experts and interested parties in further refining and developing indicators that measure progress towards on adaptation to transboundary climate risks. Yeah, it was really exciting to see transboundary climate risks get a mention in the Nairobi work programme text, and also in relation to a high-level dialogue on adaptation that appears within that informal note that came out of the GGA discussions. So anybody who would like to know more about transboundary climate risk, don't hesitate to drop Sarah and myself a line, and our details are in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. I think this is the end of our session. We've sprinted through Bonn. Hopefully you'll find more information online, and do get in touch. I think I've seen a few emails. Do get in touch with Katy and some of the others to find out more. And we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Katy, Lina, and Pilar. And we hope for the best for COP30.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.